JavaScript. All right, so for JavaScript today, my plan basically is to just go through a couple exercises with you guys. So I've posted one more lab, and I was thinking maybe the lab 7 would be the last one, but we do have some extra time, so I've got a lab 8 up there, and these are just some more exercises from chapter 7, as well as one review exercise from chapter 6. All right, so let's take a look here what we have. So go into content on D2L, and we've got lab 7 here, and then lab 8. So the exercise I want to do with you guys today is going to be the extra exercise 7.2. So let's take a quick look at that. All right, so extra 7.2, it builds off of 7.1. So basically you finish 7.1 and then you can begin working on 7.2. And we're gonna go and do the entire stretch of exercises. Now I did hear from a few students that found this clock exercise, the 7.1, a little bit tricky. So this might help you just to see me go through some of the steps. And then finishing the stopwatch, I'll go through those steps as well. There's nothing really too tricky about it. But it's just something new that really we haven't done. It's kind of a new topic, using timers. So that type of programming, you know, we're just not as used to. All right, so for this one, basically we create the clock. That's when you load the document, it's going to start counting up. As well, we have this stopwatch, which we're going to add to it. So we have 3 links. You can start the stopwatch, reset it, and stop it. And it just works like a very simple stopwatch. So the things that we're going to need to use, the first one is to do the clock. You're going to need to use a date object, and you're also going to need to use a timer that runs every second. The date object is going to get the current date, which comes with minutes, hours, and seconds, and you'll use those variables to then update your HTML to display the current time. And then for the stopwatch, all we really need to use there is a few global variables, such as our milliseconds, our seconds, and our minutes. And we're going to have a function that is going to be called, in this case, it's every 10 milliseconds, and it's going to add to our time variable. And that time variable will then be used to display on the screen. Okay, so to do this exercise, we do need to do 7.1 first. So I'm going to jump in and complete that. So I will go to lab 7, and I'm going to download extra 7.1. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to adjust this. All right, so we got extra 7.1 here, and I'm going to open up these files. We have a JavaScript file, and I'm going to open that in brackets. And I will also open up the HTML. All right, so just looking at the HTML, we're linking in our JavaScript file, and we have basically 4 places, 4 spans, which contain text elements as children. And this is what we're going to be updating as we set the time. So in this case, we can pretty much jump in. We're going to need to obviously use the $ function to get the elements by ID for these different hours, minutes, and seconds. So let's go to the clock, the JavaScript file right here. So we have a function called display current time. So one way, you know, I like to do is subdivide the problem. So one thing I could do is, without worrying about the date to start with, we could hook up the actual calls to set the text in our HTML. We'll do that first, make sure that's working. Then we'll go and actually grab a date object and set it to the correct time. So in my window on load, I'm going to want to call display current time. And I can go to display current time now, and this will be called. And I'm going to use my $ function, and I'm going to get the different IDs here. And if I just so I don't forget them, I'll just copy and paste them into here, and that way I can refer to them. So the first one is going to be hours. And I need to get the first child because that is the text element, and I need to set the node value. And I'm gonna set that to, in this case, I'm just gonna pick something. So I'm just gonna go for hours, I'm just gonna go 8. And for minutes, I'm gonna set this to, I don't know, 12. And for seconds, I'm going to set this to 22 seconds. Okay, and then I also have to set whether it's AM or PM. And I'll just say AM. All right. So at this point, I can at least preview what I've got, and I can verify that I'm able to set the HTML properties. Okay, that's because I'm not looking at an HTML page. Here we go. All right, there we go. So we know that the text is hooked up. So now really all that's left is just grabbing a date object and setting the correct time. All right, so let's go back to our JavaScript. And for this, I just need to create a date object. Now, chapter 4, when we covered that contained information about date objects. So this might not be that fresh, but we have covered it before. If you're interested in getting a bit more information, you can just type in JavaScript date and go do a quick search here, and let's just see what we have. Okay. So right here, we can see a constructor, var d equals new date. When that's run, that's going to create a new date object with the current time included in that date. And then from there, we can go and we can use any of these methods. So if I want to get the current hours, I can say get hours. That returns a value between 0 and 23. I can also go and get milliseconds, minutes, seconds. So everything I need, and hours, everything I need to complete my clock. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to go var date equals new date. And for hours, I can go and set the hours. Now the only problem is that the hours are going to be between 0 and 23, but my clock needs to be an AM PM time format. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of, I'm going to have to check to see what the hour is actually set to. So I will do a quick check here. I'm going to create a var hours equals date.get hours. If hours is greater than 12, then in this case, I'm going to want to say hours minus equals 12. And I'm going to then set the AM PM to a specific value. So in this case, I would set it to PM. Okay. And I'll have an else condition for that. And the else condition is going to set the AM PM value to AM if it's less than or equal to 12. Okay, that might not be correct. It might need to be greater than 11. Okay, anyway, that's not super important. I think that's correct though. If you're at noon, that is going to be 12 p.m. Whereas 0 would represent midnight or 12 a.m. All right, so I've got that set up. Hours greater than 11, hours minus 11. Okay, and then I set, so this might be wrong. I'll have to double check this after the video, but it doesn't really matter too much for what I'm showing off right now. So, all right, we've got that. So now we can set the hours. So I'm gonna go $hours dot first child dot node value equals hours. And now I can set the minutes as well. So minutes is going to be date.getMinutes, and seconds is going to be date.getSeconds. Okay, so at this point I can try running this, and I should see the correct time displayed in my browser. All right, there we go. So it's 11:27:32 a.m. And here I'll just move my. All right, so we can see there in my computer, the time is also 11:27. So that was done. It looks like it's working. So the last thing I need to do with this is have it update every second. So right now that time is correct right now, but it's as time ticks by, it's not updating. So that's pretty easy to do. All I need to do is go in and basically go set interval. So this is going to create a timer, and the function I want to include as my first parameter is display current time. And after that, I want to update it every second. So there we go. Now I have my timer, and it's updating every second as the browser is just sitting there using an interval timer. All right. Now you'll notice I'm not actually grabbing the timer, the variable. When I call set interval, it returns a reference to the timer. And that's important because if I ever wanted to stop the timer, I would use the clear interval function. But in this case, we don't need to worry about that. We're not adding that extra functionality in. So this concludes exercise 7.1. So the next thing that we need to now do is move on to 7.2. So let's take a look at the instructions for 7.2. So I'm going to go to my lab 8. And extra 7.2. So this one, we basically take the clock that we just created, and now we're going to add a stopwatch to it. All right, so there's a few instructions here, but essentially we can just kind of stick with what we see on the screen. We have a display right here, and this display includes minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And we have 3 links. We have a start, a stop, and a reset. So when we first load up this page, we should see 00, 00, and zeros for the milliseconds. Then when we hit start or stop or reset, that's going to do some action on our stopwatch. Start is going to have the stopwatch start counting up from 0. Stop will pause it, whereas start will then, in that case, restart it from the current position. If I hit reset, that is going to stop the timer and also set the time that it's counting up to back to 0. So just like any stopwatch we would use. So I'm going to go and pull down the actual code here to start with. So that's extra 7.2. I'm going to download it. And instead of actually working off of this code right here, I'm just going to grab the stuff that's been added on and I'm going to paste it into what I've been working on. That way we can continue working on the same file. So I'm going to go into my index.html. And I can see here that a second field set was added. And this one has the links and it also has the text span elements for the stopwatch. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to go to my other exercise that I just worked on. I'm going to paste that in. And now I'm going to go to the JavaScript. And I'm going to grab a few things. Now they've added some help to us to get started here. So they've given us some global variables. So I'll paste those into my JavaScript here. And let's see what else they've given us. Okay, they've given us some stubs of functions and some instructions which are really helpful for how to set up these different functions. So I'm going to go back to my code here and I'm going to paste in these functions. All right, so I think I'm pretty much ready now to begin. So let's just go through the extra code that I've just added here. So the first thing is we have several variables. Now this var up here, stopwatch timer, that is going to grab a reference to our stopwatch. So when we start it, we're going to use the function setInterval, which creates our timer, and it returns this value, which we'll store in stopwatch timer. That way, if we need to stop the timer, we have the ability to do that because we've stored that reference. Next up, we have elapsed minutes, elapsed seconds, and elapsed milliseconds. These values are going to store the current state of the timer. Every time we update it, we're going to use these variables to basically add on to what we previously had. And then after we've done that, we'll basically use these variables to display the text in our HTML document. All right, now let's look at we have 4 functions here. So the first one is tick stopwatch. So this is going to be called on an interval, and it says here, we're going to call this every 10 milliseconds. So every time this happens, we're going to increment our global variables that store the current time. And then after we've done that, we're going to go and we're going to display the current stopwatch time. All right, next up we have start stopwatch. So this is going to create our interval timer. It's going to store the timer reference. And that's pretty much it. So there won't be a whole lot here. Stopwatch is going to be very simple as well. All we're going to do is clear the interval for our timer reference. And then reset is going to do the same thing. It's going to call clear interval. Only this time, it's going to do a little bit of extra work. It's going to reset our global variables for our minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. It's going to reset them back to 0. And then it's also going to update our stopwatch display, so we'll see those values after they've been reset. Okay, so we can just pretty much do these in order. Tick stopwatch is the first one that we're going to call. So in this case, we're going to increment the milliseconds by 10 milliseconds, so that's easy. I can just go elapsed milliseconds plus equals 10. Now next up, it says, and this is just guiding me through the algorithm, it says if milliseconds total 1,000, we increment the seconds by 1 and reset milliseconds to 0. All right, so I can just do a simple if statement. So if milliseconds equals 1,000, then I am going to increment seconds, so elapsed seconds plus equals 1, and I'm going to set elapsed milliseconds equal to 0. And so I've done exactly what they've asked me to do. And then if seconds is equal to 60, then I'm going to set minutes. I'm going to increment minutes by 1, and I'm going to reset my elapsed seconds to 0. All right, so that should take care of updating those variables. And now I need to display the stopwatch time. So let's take a quick look at our HTML. So the actual spans that I have, which contain text, I'm just going to copy these and paste them into my JavaScript. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to use my getElementById $ function. So first off, I'll do the s milliseconds, and I need first child.node value, and I'm going to set that to elapsed milliseconds. Next up, I'm going to grab my seconds. All right, and lastly, I'm going to do my minutes. Okay, so that should display everything I need. Now, the only problem I have right now is if I want to test this, it's not hooked up to anything. And eventually this is going to be set to a timer, but I can easily just go in here and I can say tick stopwatch. for now. And that way I can test each function as I go. I don't want to write all these functions and then try testing it and then realize like it's just not working. So what we can see right away, we have stop, start, stop, reset, and you can see that the milliseconds have been updated because I did call that. So that looks like it's pretty good. I can also check my console, make sure I don't have any errors. I don't. So I'm pretty happy with that result. All right, so at this point I can move on. Next up, I'm going to write my start stopwatch. So the first thing it says here is it wants me to prevent the default action of the link. So as we know, whenever we click a link, it's going to go to whatever URL that we've specified. So if I look at my HTML, the links I have, they have an href using the hash symbol. So that means it's going to stay on the current page and it's going to move the focus to the text element with an ID of start. That's the default action. But we know that we're not going to do that. Instead, we want to capture that click event and start the stopwatch. So the first thing we need to do is cancel that event. So I'm going to go back to my HTML or my JavaScript, and we notice we're getting a parameter here, the event parameter, and that's because anytime you hook up a click event or a mouse event, by default there is going to be an event parameter that gets passed in. So all I have to do here is go event.prevent default. That takes care of that. Next up, I'm going to set up my interval timer. So let's quickly take a look. What is the name of my timer variable? It's stopwatch timer. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say stopwatch timer equals set interval. And the function I want to call is the one I just wrote called tick stopwatch. And I want to call it every 10 milliseconds. All right, so that looks like it would work. So now I can actually go and hook up this button. So all I need to do that is go to my window on load. And I just need to grab the start link and I'm going to set the onClick event and I'm going to set it to start stopwatch. So to do that, I'm just going to go, well, let's take a look at the HTML. So I'll probably get it wrong. So the ID is, for the link, is start. All right. So I'm going to go $start dot onClick equals, so with onClick, and now I'm going to set the function I want to call to start stopwatch. Okay, now notice I'm not putting parentheses around this, right? Because if I do, and this is a common mistake that we make, that would actually call the function. I want to just set that function to this callback. Okay, so there's a clear difference there. Make sure you understand that. All right, so there we go. Now I can actually fire up my HTML. And if I hit the start, it's the stopwatch is actually going to start running here, which is pretty neat. Okay. Now at this point, I can't stop or reset it. So I'm going to have to add in that functionality next. So I can keep going. Now for stopwatch, this is going to be a very, very simple function. All I'm going to do is first off prevent the default action. And then I need to stop the timer. So to do that, I just go clear interval and I pass it in my stopwatch timer variable, and that will now stop the stopwatch. So let's go back and try that out. So right now I can start the stopwatch, I can stop it. Okay, let's hit F12 and see. I know why. You guys probably know why too. So I didn't hook up that link. So all I need to do is basically grab that link, and in this case it's the stop link. I'm going to guess that it's the ID is stop, and in this case it's going to be stopwatch. All right, so here we go. I can now start it, I can stop it, and I can start it. All right, so in other words, stop is essentially basically pausing it, and then I can continue after. Okay, so we're almost done. The last one here is reset. So for reset, first off, we once again prevent the default action. And we're going to stop the timer here. So to do that, I'm going to go clear interval, stopwatch timer. And now I need to do a little bit more work. I need to reset my variables. So when I clear the interval, my seconds, milliseconds, minutes, those have all been incrementing. If I want to start over from 0, I need to take these values and I need to set them all back to 0. So I'll do that here. Okay, so I've reset those to 0. And I also now need to clear the stopwatch display. So in other words, I'm just going to grab the text IDs and I'm going to set their text values equal to these values. Now I've already done that, so I can go ahead and grab this code here that I've already written and paste that in. So that should now properly reset my stopwatch. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to set my link to use my reset stopwatch function expression. So I'm going to go reset.onClick equals reset stopwatch. Okay, and all right, here we go. So start, stop. What? It's not resetting. Okay. What did I do wrong? I probably hooked up to the wrong thing. No, okay. Reset on click equals reset stopwatch. Maybe, okay, let's see what the HTML says. Yeah, reset, that's it, let's reset. Okay, so it comes in here, reset stopwatch, prevent default, clear interval, elapsed minutes, elapsed seconds, elapsed milliseconds, and then I'm grabbing those. That's a tough one. That looks fine. That looks fine to me off the top of my head. This might be a case where I might want to debug it to see what's really going on. Maybe I didn't save it. Okay, let's just try one more time here. So start, stop, reset. Okay. So start, reset, start, stop, reset. Okay, so that's working fine. Okay, so hopefully that helped. We haven't done too many exercises in a while working with dates. So I like this exercise. It definitely gives us some practice working with date objects. And it also focuses as well on manipulating the document object model, modifying the text objects, grabbing elements and modifying their values. So it's a pretty useful exercise. One thing I didn't do that you guys need to do when you do this exercise is I didn't use this pad single digit function. So in other words, if I'm going to display an hour, right now mine is going to display with 1 digit or 2 digits. And that's going to be a little bit ugly because my clock is not going to have a consistent width when I display the text. So what you need to do is use this pad single digit function, and if the value, whether it's minutes or seconds, if it's below 10, it's going to add an additional 0 as a prefix to that number before it displays it. So I'll leave that exercise to you guys. So that's going to wrap up my video. I have posted Lab 8, so there's 2 more exercises that go with Lab 8. As well, Lab 7 is due today, so please make sure you complete those and submit them. Okay, well, talk to you guys later. Have a great day.